Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guests are Spencer Ackerman of The Guardian and James Bamford, investigative reporter who's covered the NSA for the last 3 decades and helped expose the NSA's existence in the 1980s. Jim Bamford, the breaking news at this hour is that Edward Snowden has been granted temporary asylum in Russia. Talk about the significance of this and what Edward Snowden has revealed and its effect on what we're seeing even just this week, yesterday and today in Congress.
Well, it's an enormous development. He leaving the airport for the first time, and the Russians have granted him a year. In that year, he'll be able to maybe figure a way out if he still has intentions to go to one of the countries in South America. So it gives him some breathing room. At the same time, it's the final act in this drama between the United States and Russia over what's going to happen to him. So it's very interesting what's going to happen now. Is Obama going to cancel his trip to Moscow, which is scheduled for September? So there's a lot of interesting things that are going to start happening now in terms of U.S.-Russia relationship. In terms of what Snowden gave away and what he leaked yesterday in the X-Keyscore program, I think it was really amazing the level of access that the NSA has to worldwide Internet communications. I mean, I've written about all this time and time again about access to Internet communications, but two things that struck me here was the amount of access, where they're able to get access virtually anywhere in the world to everyone's Internet communications, whether it's email or Google searches, whatever. And the other thing was when you're looking at these locations, there's 3 of these locations that are inside the United States. If you look at the map, one of them looks like it's up in San Francisco, which is where the AT&T has their large switch up there, and that's where the NSA set up their secret room. So it looks like there's that may be one of their locations. Another one looks like it's in Texas, and another one may be in New York or maybe along the Jersey coast where the cables come in. So there's an enormous, extensive access to all this telecommunications, and how easy it is for analysts to actually access this. It's just one of these pull-down menus on your computer that you just enter in an email address, put in my email address or whatever, and then there's another little opening for how much of my emails you'd like to see, a week, a month, or however much, and then you hit it, and then you're reading it, and you can just flip through the subject lines and pick out whichever emails you want to read. It's really frightening when you think of how much information these days we put into emails and Google searches, and how easy it is for this agency to access it all without really much oversight at all.
You know,
so
what Edward Snowden said famously, I sitting at my desk, he worked for Booz Allen, a contractor for NSA. He said, I sitting at my desk certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email. And the head of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, immediately called him a liar, said that wasn't true. I want to go to yesterday's hearing. Some of the interactions were quite remarkable and important. At Wednesday's hearing, Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Patrick Leahy of Vermont accused the Obama administration officials of overstating the success of the domestic phone log program. This is Senator Leahy questioning NSA Deputy Director John Inglis.
How many cases was Section 215 bulk phone records collection critical to preventing a terrorist plot?
Sir, I might answer in open session and then offer to provide follow-up details in a classified session. I would say that the administration has disclosed that there were 54 plots that were disrupted over the life of these 2 programs.
And Section 215 was critical to preventing
No, sir.
54 plots?
And of those plots, 13 of those had a homeland nexus. The others had essentially plots that would have come to fruition, Europe, Asia, other places around the world.
How many
of the 13?
How many of those 13 were plots to harm Americans?
Of the 13 that would have had a homeland nexus, 12 of those, 215 made a contribution. The question you've asked, though, is more precise in the sense of, is there a but-for case to be made, that but-for 215 those plots would have been disrupted? That's a very difficult question to answer in so much as that's not necessarily how these programs work. That's actually not how these programs work. What happens is that you essentially have a range of tools at your disposal. One or more of these tools might tip you to a plot. Others of these tools might then give you an exposure as to what the nature of that plot is. And finally, the exercise of multiple instruments of power, to include law enforcement power, ultimately completes the picture and allows you to interdict that plot. There is an example amongst those 13 that comes close to a but-for example, and that's the case of Basali Mualim.
I've read that. I've read the material on that. It'd be safe to say the target 54 but-fors.
It is safe to say that, sir.
That's not right.
This capability, the 215 collection of metadata, is focused on the homeland. It's focused on detecting plots that cross the foreign to homeland domain.
But
given that only 13
it wasn't
of those
a but-for in 54 cases.
It was not, sir.
That was NSA Deputy Director John Inglis being questioned by the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Patrick Leahy. I want to go back to Spencer Ackerman. Can you please unpack what we just heard?
What you heard was extraordinary. You heard the Deputy Director of the NSA say two things simultaneously. First, that the bulk phone records collection that's gone on for at least 7 years of all Americans' phone records, hundreds of million, yours, mine, everyone's, your neighbors, your family members, has in maybe one case, maybe, stopped a terrorist attack. Maybe. At absolute most. And he also said, and this is the subtler thing that's easier to miss, but is very important to link with yesterday's documents disclosure. He said that was the wrong way to view the program, that it wasn't a sort of, as he put it, but-for instance of actually directly stopping a plot. That's not really the right way to view it, he said. Well, look at what they told Congress in 2009 and 2011, the documents that the Obama administration disclosed yesterday. They present both of these programs, the one that we sort of commonly call PRISM, the Internet Habits and Communications Collection Program, and the Bulk Phone Records Program that they call 215. When you put them together, they describe them indistinctly, inseparably, and talk about how they directly disrupted terrorist plots, and tell Congress in secret documents that disclosing these programs would disrupt or potentially disrupt one of the most important safeguards to keeping the country safe since 9/11 and making sure that there's not another terrorist attack. That's what they told Congress ahead of key votes authorizing these programs. And now in open session, directly, they can't even say that 7 years worth of phone records collection, basically a network of everyone's social interactions conducted over the telephone, which is very easy to tell from metadata, for 7 years from all Americans has maybe stopped one terrorist plot.
Stuart Baker, the former general counsel of the National Security Agency, also testified at Wednesday's hearing. He opposed proposals for greater oversight over the NSA's surveillance programs.
Last thought, I've heard Senator Blumenthal's proposal and Judge Carr's proposal. I have to express some doubts about the idea of appointing a counsel from outside the government to represent, I don't know, well, that's the first question. Who or what is this person supposed to be representing? Are they representing the terrorists? Are they representing the court? Are they representing some abstract interest in civil liberties? Or are we just going to let them decide? You know, we got rid of the independent counsel law precisely because we were uneasy about having private parties just make up their own public policy without any check from political decision makers or without any client. And I fear we are getting into the same situation if we start appointing counsel to represent something in the context of these cases.
That's Stuart Baker, the former general counsel of the National Security Agency, at the Judiciary hearing. Jim Bamford, your response.
Well, they certainly can do a much better job on oversight than they've been doing. This is a terrible way to do oversight through the FISA court. It's a secret court at a secret address that produces secret decisions, and it's basically a rubber stamp by 10 out of the 11 judges or Republicans, conservative Republicans. It's never been reformed in probably the 35 years it's been in existence. They could easily do a number of things. They could have an advocate in there. They can have a government-appointed advocate who's a fully cleared person who can argue the other side in these cases. They can have judges that are appointed by not by one Chief Justice of the United States who may be politically oriented in terms of ideology. They could have a variety of judges appointed by federal appeals court judges. So there's a lot of things they can do, much more transparency in terms of what is released. And we can see by Spencer's discussion here about all the lying, basically, that goes on. And we have Clapper saying a complete lie in terms of what's in terms of surveillance, the fact that we weren't, that the NSA was not doing any mass surveillance on American citizens. In my New York Review of Books article, I write about numerous times that Keith Alexander, the director of NSA, has gone out and said that his agency does no surveillance of Americans. And now we have the NSA coming out with all these...
Give us a couple of examples where Keith Alexander... So you're saying Keith Alexander has repeatedly lied?
Yeah, exactly. He's said this numerous times. If you just go back to a number of his speeches, he's given speeches before a number of groups, and these different groups, which I discuss in the article, he's actually asked directly about surveillance on U.S. citizens, and he says, no, we don't do surveillance on U.S. citizens. And, what about the telephone records? I mean, if that's not surveillance, I don't know what it is. So, and then you have, again, you have all this discussion here about 54 plots. The one plot that they actually have discussed was this subway plot in New York, where the information actually came from the British. They were the first ones to come up with the information, not the NSA. And the other one was this case where somebody in San Diego was detected sending $8,000 to a group in Somalia. I mean, that's their big cases here. So this is useless surveillance, and but you can tell how Congress eventually approves this by peeling away all these layers of deception.
You mentioned Jim Clapper.
The presentations.
You mentioned James Clapper. On Wednesday, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley criticized Clapper, the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, for making untruthful statements to Congress in March about the bulk phone records.
Oversight by Congress will play an important role as we move forward in evaluating the wisdom and value of the intelligence programs. However, Congress needs accurate information in order to conduct oversight responsibilities that the Constitution demands that we do under our checks and balances of government. That is why it was especially disturbing to see that the Director of National Intelligence was forced to apologize for inaccurate statements he made last March before Senate Intelligence Committee. Those statements concern one of the very important programs that we will be hearing about this very day. Nothing can excuse this kind of behavior from a senior administration official of any administration, especially on matters of such grave importance.
So let's go back to, now that was Chuck Grassley, Republican senator, but let's go back to March when Democratic Senator Ron Wyden questioned James Clapper about the NSA.
does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
That's what Clapper said about the NSA in March. Spencer Ackerman, well, we've come a long way, or have we? Where is this going right now?
Well, let's just back up for 1 second. The reason why Wyden even asked Clapper that question in a public hearing in the first place was to go back to Keith Alexander. General Alexander, at a different hacker conference last year, was asked that question in a different forum, and he said that it was hogwash, that there was just simply no truth to the idea that NSA was keeping what he called dossiers on millions of Americans, and a series of colloquies between Wyden, who on the Intelligence Committee knew something about what was actually happening here, and Clapper and the NSA, and ultimately led Wyden out of frustration to ask Clapper that question publicly. And he recently, in a speech last week, referred to a culture of misinformation in the intelligence community by senior intelligence officials, Clapper, Alexander, and others, about to the public what exactly the NSA and other intelligence agencies are doing to surveil Americans. Wyden on the Senate floor on Tuesday told his colleagues again that, without using Clapper's name, that Clapper lied to him again in a letter saying that violations of NSA's own very few restrictions on how these programs are conducted were inadvertent and accidental. Wyden couldn't go into details because they're classified, but he now has a track record of sort of, coughing and sort of pointing and subtly directing attention to the discrepancies between what intelligence officials say publicly and what they say privately.
Spencer, let's actually go to Senator Wyden in that speech he gave on the Senate floor on Tuesday, calling on the Obama administration to end the bulk phone records collection program.
The fact of the matter is that Americans' phone records can reveal a lot of private information. If you know, for example, that somebody called a psychiatrist 3 times in a week and twice after midnight, you know a lot about that person. And if you're vacuuming up information on whom Americans call, when they call, and how long they talk, you are collecting an astounding amount of information about a huge number of law-abiding Americans. The intelligence agencies try to emphasize that they have rules about who can look at these bulk phone records and when. But, Mr. President, I want to emphasize this, because I think after all of the talking on cable and the talking heads on TV, I want to emphasize none of these rules require the NSA to go back to a court to look at Americans' phone records, and none of these rules erase the privacy impact of scooping up all of these records in the first place. On top of that, as I indicated at the beginning, there have been a number of serious violations of those rules. For the senators who got the letter last Friday, you know that. I want to tell all the other senators on both sides of the aisle that the violations, as I touched on tonight, were more serious, a lot more serious than the public has been told. I believe the American people deserve to know more details about these violations that were described last Friday by Director Clapper. Mr. President, I'm going to keep pressing to make more of those details public. And, Mr. President, it's my view that the information about the details, the violations of the court orders with respect to the bulk phone record collection program, the admission that the court orders have been violated has not been, I think, fully fleshed out by the intelligence community. And I think considerable amount of additional information can be offered without in any way compromising our national security.
That is Oregon Senator Ron Wyden on the floor of the Senate on Tuesday. We'll be going to more of him and discussion with our two guests, Spencer Ackerman with The Guardian. As well, we have been speaking with James Bamford, who has covered the National Security Agency for the last 3 decades. And again, the breaking news is that the news we had out of Russia is that the person who started the ball rolling on all of these hearings right now, Edward Snowden, who has been holed up at the Moscow airport, has left the airport and granted temporary asylum in Russia for a year. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute.